Australia is recalling all of its 113 foreign diplomats for a two-day summit next month to revamp its foreign policy in uncertain times. Why is it in such a hurry to do that? And last year, China managed to create more than 13 million urban jobs for the fourth consecutive year. But how can one maintain that trend against a global downturn? Welcome to The Point. I'm Liu Xin. At a time of significant global uncertainty, especially with President Donald Trump's new view of the world, its close ally Australia is anxious to find a new way to advance its national interests. The Australian government has announced that all 113 foreign diplomats, including ambassadors, commissioners and consul generals, will be brought back to Canberra for a two-day summit next month to revamp Australia's foreign policy in uncertain times. Foreign Minister Julie Bishop said this meeting will be important in strengthening Australia's influence and standing in the world. In fact, since the end of last year, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade has had a webpage asking the public's opinions about its foreign policy. Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull even appeared in a video to encourage submissions. So why is Australia in such a hurry to reset its foreign policy, and what elements will they consider when they draft it? For more insight, I'm joined by Professor Greg McCarthy, BHP Billiton Chair of Australian Studies at Peking University. Thank you, Mr. McCarthy, for joining me in the studio. So Pleasure. It's a massive undertaking, 1.2 million US dollars or Australian dollars to be spent on the whole project. Why is Australia doing this at this particular time?
I think there's two reasons for this. It started off as an election promise to have a look at the white paper on Australian foreign policy, and it seemed like you just had submissions and it would be fairly straightforward. When there was commissioned, the idea would be, I think, that Hillary Clinton would be in the White House and it would be business as usual. And then when Donald Trump was elected, a crisis became evident to think through our foreign policy. And with a crisis came an opportunity. So I think the government has responded, particularly the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Bishop, to bring all the diplomats back to give the expert opinion. It's not just what's going on in America, but it's also fracturing across the alliance in Europe, the concerns about Asia. So if you think about Australian foreign policy, the three major places for our diplomats, our three major points of diplomatic interest are Washington, Beijing and Jakarta. So sending back the Ambassador Jan Adams from China is an important step. It also has to keep in mind that the head of the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade was the ex-ambassador from China, that's Francis Adamson. So I think there's a genuine concern that we've seen the rise of China. China continues to rise, the decline of the US, and Trump exemplifies this crisis that we need to bring our expert back to sort of look at the crisis and what the opportunities present.
Sure. Now, this is the third foreign policy white paper, right, that's going to come out. The last time was 2003, almost 14 years ago. When you look at the last white paper, what do you think are the possible new directions that Australia might be looking at now?
I think the Australian foreign policy has relied on the American alliance, and therefore it hasn't had to think through too difficultly what to do in foreign policy. So this is the first time someone is saying, cynics are saying, it's the first time we have to take seriously our own foreign policy, because it's been too reliant on America, we've been too tied to the American alliance. So the 2003 one was like that. It came in with the Howard government. It was an argument that we didn't have to choose between our economic trade with China or with our strategic alliance with America. Now we're struck with the problem that the value systems are shifting. We were fairly sure over those 13 years that what Australia followed was the American notion of a law-based order or a rules-based order. Now what we find with Donald Trump is that he has abandoned the rules-based order for what could be called might is right, and that gives Australia real problems.
Yeah, I mean, we all remember this phone call that Malcolm Turnbull had with Donald Trump. We understand that it's about the agreement to relocate the refugees that have been stranded on islands near Australia. Now, how do you also mentioned this changing dynamic of a relationship between Australia and the United States? Where do you think Australia has to go from now? Because since you had this security treaty with the United States since the 1950s, you have been pretty comfortable, right? But
yes.
Now Donald Trump, not just to Australia, but also to other countries, for instance, Japan and the
Yes.
NATO countries, you have to take a bigger share of your responsibility.
So I think there's a genuine concern that's going on in Australia, and that's been evident in the release of documents that look at and debate this issue in Australia around the foreign policy. Some are saying that we have to look completely differently at Australian foreign policy. So ex-Prime Minister Keating, for example, said it's a new opportunity to rethink the American alliance. And there's a number of people who line up with him. There's a second group of people who line up to say, well, the American alliance is the bedrock of our position, it's been there ever since, and that we will ride out the Trump period and keep the bedrock going. So there's the two lines that are happening in Australian foreign policy, which is that...
Which line is going to be stronger, you think?
The problem we face, I think, is that the government doesn't want to break with the American alliance.
And probably it's not realistic at this moment either.
It's not realistic. But it does face this real conundrum that the American alliance was based on this rules-based order. So that throws into a whole series of conundrums for us. Firstly, we were strongly supporting of the American position on the Trade-Pacific Partnership, because that was a means of enmeshing China into a rules-based order. So we're trying to lure China into this rules-based order.
And now
it's gone.
Donald Trump, now it's gone. Let's also talk about this very different dynamic concerning China. I mean, since 2003, Australia's trade relationship with China has also changed dramatically, right?
That's right.
Now China is, I would say, the biggest trade partner with Australia.
Australia's biggest trade partner.
Yeah, and Australia also jumped into to be a founding member of the AIIB, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. So how is Australia going to adapt to the presence of China, the growing presence?
Well, this is the issue it faces, is that as the rules-based order is gone and that Trump is saying that he will assert foreign policy in a different means, Australia's caught two things. One is trade, whether it would agree and come in with China on a rules-based order, because China is looking towards that process and that it's talked about trade in those terms. So Australia is tempted to go down this path because it's the principles. And it's the principles that President Xi has been talking about guiding a rules-based system.
Yes.
So we're tempted to go that way. But the other way is that the old containment of China still remains, because some people are talking about an alliance between Australia, Japan, India and Australia, a four-way alliance to contain China. So you're caught between this containment position, which has been there a long time, and the fact that we are the #1 trading partner with China.
Yeah.
We have 150,000 Chinese students there every year.
You have a big headache.
We have a big headache.
Well, I hope all these ambassadors, diplomats will help solve that problem.
Yes, hope so.
Thank you very much, Professor Greg McCarthy, joining us from Peking University. Indeed, I think that what really lies behind Australia's scramble to have a new foreign policy is the evolving world order in which we're living. It's not just Australia, I must say, that is doing this. We have also seen other countries such as Japan, who used to feel so assured under America's defense umbrella. Now all of a sudden they feel they can't take things for granted anymore. At the same time, the rapid rise of China is also giving them a new mixture of opportunities and challenges. Hopefully these ambassadors that are being recalled back to Australia will have the vision to see where the future lies. You have been watching The Point. I'll be back right after this. The latest figures from the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security show that in 2016, China managed to create more than 30 million jobs for the fourth consecutive year. The registered unemployment rate in Chinese cities stood at just over 4% last year. The figures are encouraging, but obstacles remain. How can one maintain the employment rate in a reasonable range against sagging economic growth is still a challenge for the Chinese government. Thus, employment employment and income will no doubt be a hot topic during the ongoing sessions, that is the MPC session and the CPPCC sessions. Today I'm joined in the studio by Professor Zheng Zheng from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and Mr. Tang Ming, a councillor in the State Council of China's central government. Thank you for joining me in the studio. First of all, help us understand the 4.02% employment rate that has just been announced by the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security. Is it a good number?
It is a very low number, yes.
And but some people are saying the employment number that China releases is not in the same concept as the Western employment number. Is there a, or is the really the reality that we're seeing here, 4%?
I doubt about it. I think the definition of unemployment rate, I think, is the same.
Mr. Tang?
Probably a little bit different in terms of some rural migrants. For example, the farmer, they find a job in urban area, but if they have a difficulty, they go back to their villages.
Will they be counted in the system?
If they are not registered, and usually will not fully counted, because many of them even do not have very good statistics. Particularly for the marginal in the county and all those places.
Yeah. Now, I think it's quite remarkable that for 4 consecutive years, China has been able to achieve such achievement. I mean, 30 million people, to give 30 million people jobs amid a slowing down economy. How do you think China managed to do that?
Well, I think create a new job or create enough new jobs, I think that's a local government's effort. Everywhere you go, you'll hear people talk about how they need to pay much more effort to create new jobs for next year, predict there will be new labor force into the market. So I think it is for a long time China's economic growth has considered with employment, not only because of resource.
Mr. Tang?
Yeah, as an economist, we always talk about the structure change, right? In the past many years, and how many years, and probably in China's the whole economic structure change is service sector grows very fast. And manufacturing, agriculture reducing, that growth rate reducing, right? But service sector need more laborers. So that's why maybe overall economic growth is not that high, but because the service sector, which is quite a labor intensive area, grows faster than the others. So then we create more job. The other thing is China now is not, we have too much employment. In fact, our major problem now is a shortage of labor. A lot of factories they cannot find.
Why do we have that problem?
Yeah, one area is because in the past few years we do have the labor force reducing, and second one is a lot of young people. They don't want to working in the factories and manufacturing assembly lines because they feel very boring. They would rather to doing some service sector and working for more exciting area. So now, overall, particular service, the manufacturing sector will have a difficult to find laborers.
Now, at the same time, a lot of companies are also recruiting, having higher standard in their recruitment. For instance, they don't want to have graduates who are from college. They want to have people who have master degrees or even doctor degrees. What is behind that? I mean, are we having too many college students to begin with?
Well, I think it depends on the structure of the industry, right? The different companies need different talent. I don't think college students are not needed anymore, but I think it's because they are looking for some jobs they wanted to work with. However, the market may not satisfy them. So they're spending a longer time to looking for a job.
Now, Mr. Tang, you were one of the people who initiated the increase of enrollment to Chinese colleges and universities, and nowadays some people seem to be blaming you for the difficulty of graduates looking for jobs. How do you explain that?
But number one is actually the college graduate majority, most of them find a job, because we have a statistics from some newspapers, news media reports say a lot of college students cannot find job. Actually, it's not true. And China now, the statistics shows by the end of the year, usually 93% of people, the college students find a job. The rest of them, and many of them, they're waiting for the graduate schools or go abroad. They're preparing something. The real unemployment of that is around less than 3%, right? And you look globally, the college student, that 3% is actually not very high unemployment. But some of them, they don't like their job, and then we find out the job changing very quickly, because they have a very high expectation, high income expectation. When they start to work, they think they don't like it, they drop out. More than 30% people, in the half years, they change another job. That job turnover rate is very high. But this is another story. So unemployment rate from the college graduates is not that high. But because those young people have a higher demand, have better opportunities, they are like turnover. This is the current case.
Yes. Let's have some international input here, and I have Mr. Mike Baston, who is Senior Lecturer from Southampton Solent University, joining us from London. Thank you, Mike, for joining us today. Now, we have heard the latest figures coming from China that for 4 consecutive years, 13 million people have been able to find jobs. How do you look at this figure, and what do you think it represents, given that China's economy has been slowing down? The growth rate for last year was 6.7%, much slower than the double-digit growth we had many years ago.
Yes, and 6.9% the year before. I mean, the figure of 30, I think it's 13.14 million jobs created, I think is rather impressive. The target was, I think, 10 million, so it's well in excess of that. The urban unemployment rate is down 4.02%, less than the target 4.5%. So I think it's steady. It's no real cause for concern. But as has been echoed by the other panelists, it certainly is a job market that's under pressure. Obviously, a lot of state-owned enterprise reform, I think, will continue. There's overcapacity, so there will be laid off workers, and university students will be looking for better jobs with a lot of training. So I think the way forward is it's really reform of the economy, focus on premium brands, high investment, high training, quality training inside Chinese companies, and that's what we need to see more of, particularly outside the first-tier cities. So there need to be attractive opportunities in second and third tier cities. So we need I think a slight cultural change in Chinese companies, where training and investment in staff is put first and not low cost and low price.
Yeah, well, you have been observing China's employment situation for quite a while. You understand that, for instance, young people would want to work in better jobs. They don't want to go and do those dirty jobs that bring them less money, and they want to go to first-tier cities, as you mentioned, Beijing, Shanghai, the big cities, although these big cities are already way too big to welcome, to accommodate all of these people. How do you look at the differences of the employment trend in China and that in your country and in Europe or in the United States, for instance?
Well, there are differences, but there are similarities. I mean, the employment figures in the US still remain relatively, the unemployment figures relatively low. And in the UK, there's not a real cause for concern. But the difference with China and Chinese companies, and I think this is the reason why a lot of university students, Chinese university students, particularly graduating overseas, prefer to work for a foreign company, a famous foreign brand. And I think that the reason for that is the training. I don't think it's so much the salary, it's the training and career development that they see there that has been in place for quite some time. So I think that the trend that we need to see now in China's economy and Chinese companies is much more emphasis on training and career development, and a more sort of Western outlook for these companies, more internationally expansive. And we are seeing that with Chinese companies and Chinese brands now becoming successfully globally, obviously Lenovo, Huawei, high technology. So I think that again, the way forward is for Chinese companies to look inside Western companies and offer the training and investment in staff much more.
Yeah, Mr. Tang, do you agree with Mike's assessment just now?
Yeah, I think I more or less agreed. And China's economic structure and a little bit different with the other countries, right? But currently, unemployment is not a major concern in Chinese economy. In fact, for the manufacturing, particularly, there was shortage of labor.
Mm-hmm. And Madam Zheng, your input?
Well, I think I agree that in-job training is very important. And on the other way, say that the extension of college enrollment actually benefited from that. I will benefit that because if you imagine those college graduates, they will work for 30 years. So they need to update their knowledge, and they are in better position to update their knowledge.
Mm-hmm. One very important piece of information that came out just yesterday was that China announced it's going to cut additional 500,000 jobs from the coal and steel industry on top of the over 725,000 China already relocated last year. How do you look at the importance of this work for China at this moment, Mr. Tang?
And it's important for economic reform and the structural reforms. But in terms of unemployment, not that significant, right? And 500,000 compared with the 50 million create or 14 million create every year, this 500,000 is not a big problem. Compared with 1990s, end of 1990s, when those days we have major reform, major layoff, we lay off more than 10 million people, right? Mm-hmm. And those days, a lot of small, medium-sized enterprise is closing down. That period is very problematic, but now it's not a major problem. But still, this is 500,000 people, and if they lose a job, we need to give a training, need to give a settlement, and we need to help them. And government prepare a huge amount of money to doing that.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, the Chinese government has been lauded for the kind of effort it has put in to try to give training to the people who have been laid off so that they can adapt to future job market. Mike, let me come back to you now. In contrast, we know that President Donald Trump just gave his first speech to Congress the other day, where he said he's going to bring dying industries roaring back to life, and he's vowing to revive America's long ailing coal and steel industry. What do you look at the contrast in employment policies between these two countries?
Well, there's a complete contrast in those industries, in coal and steel. Obviously, in the case of China, there is massive overcapacity. So these job cuts, I'm afraid, are a necessary evil. Obviously, as painlessly as possible is the way forward. Retraining, job clubs, really supporting laid-off workers and encouraging them to start their own business. And I think I would praise the Chinese central government in that respect. This wave of entrepreneurialism now, which is sweeping China, is very much supported by the central government. And that's not really what's coming out of President Trump's rhetoric. And what he actually means when it comes to the American industries is still very, very unclear. And we have to wait and see. But in terms of the Chinese government, certainly huge efforts have been made. And I think the way forward is very, very clear. And an important point to note on this, on restructuring overcapacity and restructuring state-owned enterprises, that will attract more foreign direct investment, and that's very, very important for the Chinese economy, and that will create jobs. There's that wave of FDI that really sparked the economic miracle back in 1979, 1980, and that's what we need to see again.
Okay, and we're going to leave our discussion there. Many thanks to Mike Baston joining us from London, and Mr. Tang Ming and Ms. Zheng joining us here in the studio. You have been watching The Point, and my last point is coming up right after this. Well, when it comes to solving problems, it is often a good idea to look around you and see how others have come up with solutions to the same dilemmas. If we look at how the US has been tackling these problems of unemployment, are there any good lessons we can learn? Join me in the studio was some guests from China and from the UK, but what really I wanted to say is that China had the lesson of concentrating too much on heavy industry, on the coal and steel industry, and right now we're having to live with the consequences of this industry. For instance, so very often we are seeing people walking on the streets with these face masks. So think twice. If you want to have more people in the United States wearing these things, then revive your coal and steel industries. That's my point today. Thank you for joining us, and as usual you can follow me on Twitter and Facebook, and the handle is The Point with LX, all in one word. You can also watch our previous programs on the CGTN page of YouTube. You can click on the playlist and look for The Point with Liu Xin. Thank you for joining us.